On September 2nd, 2018, a fire broke out at the renowned National Museum of Brazil. For 200 years, the museum functioned as the primary institute of history and science for not just Brazil, but for a large portion of South America as a whole. It housed a collection of approximately 20 million items. The BBC would later report that upwards of 90% of it was destroyed in the blaze. The impact this will have on science cannot be comprehended. We may never understand just what this means for us decades from now. But just for today, I'm not as concerned with that. No, today I'm more interested in the cultural ramifications. Google defines culture as either the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement, or the ideas, customs, and social behavior of a particular people or society. Though outwardly separate ideas, both blend together to form this vague, loose idea of what culture is. For me, culture is people. It is the background radiation that tells us who we are and what we value. It's our movies, the language of our friends and colleagues. It's how you react to advertisements on the Sydney Opera House. As we move towards a more globalized culture, predominantly shaped by an Anglo-centric perspective, the views and traditions of minority groups are being increasingly threatened. Institutions such as the National Museum of Brazil are critical for preserving the heritage and culture of humanity. As Emmanuel Arinzi says in his essay, The Role of the Museum in Society, the museum as an institution tells the story of man the world over and how humanity has survived in its environment over the years. It houses things created by nature and by man, and in our modern society it houses the cultural soul of the nation. He later adds that as institutions possessing critical resources in society, they can encourage, promote, and foster the best of the cultural and democratic ideals of the nation. In that sense, museums tend to put forward an idealized version of a society, and while it is a whole can of worms in its own right, I would put forth that in a globalized world, having an institution that attempts to offer some grounding to the question of who you are might be of some value to certain people. Culture does not exist in a vacuum and requires humanity to exist, both in the metaphysical sense that culture's main influence is on humanity, but also in the sense that culture is literally maintained by humans. The stories of the Indigenous Australians were passed down from generation to generation. Shakespeare's work have survived for centuries due to curation. The first photograph would have faded long ago had it not been for a specially designed frame that preserves it. Even those old magazines you have stashed in a box somewhere is a form of cultural preservation. Part of being human is to carry and preserve culture by virtue of existing within a cultural landscape. Of course, this only accounts for the media that we know of, the culture that survived. What of the culture that died? Have you ever stopped and wondered just how much of humanity's creation has been lost over the course of thousands of years? Every language, every printed word or carved statue. Not loud and bombastic deaths, but silent ones, no less tragic. The final copy of a book being lost or burnt. The stories the Indigenous elders never got to tell. Anywhere from 75 to 90% of all silent films have been lost. Most would not have mourned them at the time. Even on the internet, a place where supposedly nothing is forgotten, artifacts are lost. It might still technically exist on a hard drive somewhere, but do you really have a means of tracking down that one photo of your college dorm from 2004 posted on a long-defunct forum? When you stop and think about it, a strong portion of all art and media ever created is no longer available, or even known to us. Culture so very rarely telegraphs its demise to us. But on September 27th of 2018, a piece of media gave us a date for when it would be no more. The digital world of WildStar would come to an end. WildStar was developed by Carbine Studios, founded by a handful of Blizzard employees after the release of World of Warcraft. It was a massively multiplayer online role-playing game in the same vein as World of Warcraft. Game development began in 2005, and WildStar would be released in August of 2014, after almost a decade-long development. WildStar was not a particularly good video game. As much as it breaks my heart to say it, its sin was that it was ill-conceived. For years there was this myth in the World of Warcraft community that the game was once incredibly difficult and was being dumbed down as time went on, and that as a result the core audience was leaving to be replaced by volatile casuals who would abandon the game at the first sign of trouble. As the myth went, Blizzard had bled millions of loyal, skilled, and desirable players that were aching for World of Warcraft to return to the way it was, and if Blizzard didn't change their ways, a competitor would come along and, with the backing of those dedicated consumers, usurp WoW as the dominant MMO. This was, of course, complete nonsense. At the time of WildStar's release, World of Warcraft had never been more complex or impenetrable. WoW was a decade old at this point, and so many players with just years of muscle memory and osmosis just weren't able to gauge what it was like as a new player. And, you know, like the most minor quality of life improvements were treated as the sign of an upcoming apocalypse, one that we are still yet to see. Ankleweed, oh, 7 ankleweed. This is staying in. Wasn't even the best take. Carbine Studios bought into this idea that there was an audience who yearned for the good old days of World of Warcraft, people who liked attunements, hostile system design, and bad PvP. Whereas every other casualty of the WoW derivative subgenre tried to further the genre in some way, WildStar's ambitions were pointed strictly at recapturing the texture of times past. WildStar marketed itself on difficulty and grind. It sought to appeal to the ego of your stereotypical MMO player.
See, raids in WildStar are what we always thought raids should be. For those who aren't hardcore, raids are when 20 to 40 lunatics rush headlong into a nightmarish scenario of pure carnage and impossible odds. Why? Because they're hardcore. And when it comes to mini-bosses, we don't mess around. These fights are complex. So, what's a boss like then? Check it. No website walkthrough will prepare you for the randomized chaos being thrown in every direction.
There are many, many problems with this. Let's begin by discussing the game's contemporary. World of Warcraft launched with 40-player raid dungeons, massive environments intended for 40 people to defeat. Raiding was also intended as a regular thing you would do. You would join a guild and raid on a weekly schedule. This meant that if you wanted to do a 40-man raid each week, you would need 40 people available. This is without even accounting for attunements. See, you couldn't just see some people being short-staffed for a raid and just go with them. No, you needed the key to get into the dungeon, often requiring a lengthy adventure in and of itself, and chances are good not to get the key, you would need a key for somewhere else. Being able to attend raids was not only a huge commitment week to week, but the amount of time it would take to access the raids and prepare for them was just insane. As a result, guilds would be fortunate to even have access to 40 people on any given night. The saving grace was that in 2004, World of Warcraft's raids were not complex on an individual basis. Only a few key individuals would carry out the essential tasks, and if other players struggled, it wasn't going to stonewall your evening. Due to the ergonomic nightmare that these raids posed to players, Blizzard identified them as unsustainable and phased them out of the game with the release of their first expansion pack, opting instead for 10 and 25 player formats. But WildStar didn't take this lesson on board. 40-man raiding was, after all, the good old days, and WildStar was quite proud to place 40-man raiding based around attunements at the center of its endgame experience, and this brought with it all the same problems, plus a few more. The problems with 40-man raids were exasperated by WildStar's difficulty. While Carbine Studios wanted to capture the perceived camaraderie and scale of those World of Warcraft raids, they decided to carry their approach to challenging the individual into the context of a 40-man raid. As an exercise in individual play, these fights are intense and draining, and only a few deaths will end the entire attempt. Just like in WoW, this meant lengthy sessions of repeating the same encounters over and over again until every player is acclimated to the fight. It is incredibly draining.
The biggest thing is that WildStar rating is different than WoW rating. There's more focus on execution and more focus on personal responsibility in this game. You can constantly yourself and other people over almost always, and that is exhausting.
But by this time, WoW could have the hardest content done with as few as 10 players. WildStar was producing arguably more difficult fights intended for 40 people. That is just ludicrous. Oh, and the attunement process was more convoluted than anything World of Warcraft ever had. Guilds struggled to get 40 people into raiding from the get-go, yet alone several weeks into progression. As a result, it shouldn't shock you to learn that 40-man raids lasted only a touch over 4 months before being phased out of WildStar. Carbine Studios overinvested in the hardcore demographic. Comments like this, that supported the decisions Carbine were making at the time, were revealed to be baseless. There wasn't a sizable audience willing to go through all this as a means of entertainment. The oppressive elements of vanilla WoW systems failed in a modern setting, and as it so often does, it all came back to nostalgia. Having built the game from the ground up to appeal to hardcore players, there was no easy fix to the situation that WildStar found itself in. Casual players were made to feel unwelcome, but the hardcore players were slowly trickling out as their guilds failed to progress through or even get into the raids. The following months saw the raid scene of WildStar slowly crumble, and shortly after WildStar went free-to-play in September of 2015, Carbine all but ceased updating the raid content. With raiding guilds so few and far between, most new players would never see the inside of the raids, and WildStar took on this weird identity of a social sandbox with compelling combat but a tattered endgame. But I don't want to talk about any of that today. I don't want to talk about the dungeon that was just a 45-minute long escort quest with no checkpoints. I don't want to talk about the incomprehensible gear system or the untested PvP. I want to talk about the things I liked. The game's style was arguably some of the best in the genre. It had gorgeous animations that conveyed so much personality. Even something really simple like the squash and stretch on this mount. Look at how fun this is. Dan Floyd described the game's aesthetic as Firefly by way of Jak and Daxter, and 4 years on the game is still a joy on the eyes, and the soundtrack is pretty rad too. WildStar's combat felt modern and exciting. Telegraphed attacks were not a new idea in MMOs at the time, but WildStar baked it into the foundation of their combat system. As a result, the fundamental interaction with the game was always involved. You were always reacting to stimulus of some variation. Despite that, as you may have figured out, I didn't particularly enjoy my time with WildStar. It took me about 4 days to get to max level, and I played the game for maybe another week afterward before checking out. That was 4 years ago. And yet, I have dozens of strong memories associated with this game. The game has stuck with me in a way that few others have. I never forgot about it. So while this game may have failed in its ambitions to usurp World of Warcraft, to me it is far from a failure in the absolute sense. I want to end our critique of WildStar on the topic of player housing, because it impacted me in a way I wasn't prepared for. You see, in WildStar, every player would get a plot of land to call their home, and they could place assets around the environment, change the music and the skybox, really make it feel like their own space. It was something extraordinary, but players went wild with it. There was an option for a community house as well, where groups of people could come together and construct a clubhouse to their own tastes. With WildStar all but abandoned, so too are these homes, but you can still visit them. You have the ability to explore the homes of strangers with little more than a name to go off. I spent hours wandering the uninhabited plots of people I would never meet, elaborate designs and personal touches that may never be seen by another human's eyes ever again. It is how I imagine it must feel to explore the ruins of Chernobyl, a brief look into the lives of people who have long since moved on. It is intimate while still feeling incredibly detached. Allow me to show you some of my favourites. The housing system is intended to be outdoors, with prefab structures to act as buildings. But the Dead Star managed to build an elaborate interior structure complete with guards and a giant aquarium hallway. This guy has a maze constructed of ice you must navigate to get into the home proper, complete with dead ends with a bench for me to catch my breath. This community home is built around winding tunnels that lead you from location to location, and once again it also has traps and dead ends to catch out intruders. Part of the highway can only really be described as a roller coaster, complete with flaming skull exit, and this one is just wild. Maybe I've just been working on this for way too long, but to me these digital spaces have value. They evoke humanity. We've been talking about the creation of this game in the abstract, as though the video game stalk descended from the clouds, bringing with it Carbine Studios' WildStar. But that, of course, isn't how it happens. These games are the product of people, humans. Humans who make bad decisions, make mistakes, who get it wrong. Humans who devote a large portion of the cosmic miracle of their life to creating something for the rest of us. Humans who craft life when none existed, who engage, entertain, and inform. Humans who created an entire world. A world that has in some small, irrelevant way impacted me. Changed me. Carbine Studios created a work of art. It created a piece of culture. A piece of culture that we have lost. A world that we have lost. WildStar is the first of the WoW killers to be shut down. All the games you've forgotten about, Ion, Rift, The Old Republic, DC Universe Online, they still exist. They may no longer have any cultural significance, but you can experience them should you wish. By the time you are watching this, you'll most likely not be able to experience WildStar. You will never get to see this small village erect a statue in your honor and chant your name for the rest of their days. You'll never explore this derelict spaceship. You will never see my own stupid house. Video games have a problem with preservation. Rapidly changing hardware and the rise of online gaming has given us an ever-growing list of media that can likely never be experienced again. When I told a friend that WildStar was shutting down, he responded with, "Good, it was bad." And I believe that attitude includes far more core gamers than it excludes. People do not value old or niche games, and will likely not mourn them. I imagine this is what happened with silent films. People at the time did not see the merit in the 2- and 3-star movies. As a result, a generation of film was lost. And that loss will not be felt until decades after the fact. I believe the same will occur with games. As Alex Handy, founder of the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment, said in an interview,
"You never know what is going to be significant in a piece of art or the culture until far after society has sort of digested it and passed it along on its way."
So if you will indulge me for just a few more minutes. I'd like to take some time to reflect on the world of WildStar and attempt to preserve it in some irrelevant way. Not as the flawed commercial product that it was, but instead as the culmination of years of effort and dedication, as a piece of art and as a piece of our collective culture. Thank you for listening. This was Carbine Studios' WildStar.